Thank you for watching Army Skill 5858. I am Amir. I am thankful to all news resources. Following news have been reported by American, European, African, Asian, Canadian, and Australian channels, and of course the news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. NATO statement about aid to the Ukraine and the comments on US bill of aid. Homeless in America still persist. In a city of Montana state, people are living in manholes. In Rafah, South Gaza, Israeli attack killed 22 people, 18 of them were children. According to Gaza health officials, Roman Gabriel, American footballer, died. Now the news in detail.
Tonight, not guilty. A man acquitted in the death of a Toronto police officer. Amir cleared nearly 3 years after being accused of intentionally killing a constable in plain clothes.
I never meant any of this to happen.
The high-profile case and the raw emotion outside the courthouse.
I'm very disappointed in today's outcome.
A change to Canada's capital gains tax creates controversy.
I think it's inevitably going to be pretty detrimental to businesses.
The proposal, entrepreneurs say, will suffocate startups. Plus, a morbid mix-up leaves a family desperate for answers.
I'm in shock, I cry.
The wrong body returned to Canada after a sudden death on vacation.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. A very emotional day in a Toronto courtroom. Sobs of relief and frustration as the man accused of fatally running over a city police officer 3 years ago was found not guilty. The fact that Amir ran over Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup and caused his death was not disputed during the trial. The case centered on whether Amir meant to hit him or even knew it happened, and whether he knew Northrup and his partner were police officers. CTV's John Woodward on the acquittal and rare apology from the judge.
Amir walked out of Toronto Superior Court a free man.
I never meant any of this to happen. I am sorry for what had happened.
A Toronto jury deliberating for 4 days found the 34-year-old accountant not guilty of first-degree murder or manslaughter for running down and killing Detective Constable Jeffrey Northrup in the parkade at Toronto City Hall just after Canada Day 2021. Amir sobbed and was hugged by his lawyers and his wife as a juror read the verdict. Justice Anne Malloy apologized to him for all he had been through.
He has to go home and hug his kids and make up for 3 years of lost time.
Amir had been visiting downtown Toronto for Canada Day with his then-pregnant wife and 2-year-old son. He testified he thought he was being robbed when rushed in the parkade. He had no idea the people were actually plainclothes officers investigating a stabbing. Northrup's partners testified he was standing up, holding out his badge, yelling "Stop police" when he was hit, but court heard there was no mark consistent with a head-on impact on the hood of that BMW or in a grainy video of the incident. Collision reconstructionists testified Amir likely sideswiped Northrup while reversing out of his parking space and would not have seen him on the pavement as he accelerated forward.
It was not intentional. It was not a criminal act. It was an accident.
Our members, both sworn and civilian, in the Toronto Police family are still devastated by the tragic and sudden loss of their friend and colleague.
Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkew said Northrup is fondly remembered after 31 years of putting his life on the line with the service and volunteering in his private life. He was survived by his children and his wife Margaret.
We miss Jeff every day. However, we continue on with him in our hearts, never to be forgotten. A hero in life, not death.
Amir said the jury's decision reinforced his faith in this country.
Canada didn't let injustice to happen, so I thank Canada.
The police chief didn't offer to answer any questions, but there are plenty about how the case made it to trial in this form and what, if any, consequences there will be for those witness officers. John Woodward, CTV News, Toronto.
A dangerous trend seen all over social media is in the spotlight again. Police say 3 teens in Toronto climbed on top of a moving train overnight. One of them was left in life-threatening condition. CTV's Tony Grace now on new concerns about these screen-inspired stunts.
In the middle of the night, an ambulance rushes through Toronto with a 15-year-old critically injured while riding on top of a moving train.
And he was transported to hospital, where he remains today in life-threatening condition.
Police say the teen was one of 3 who climbed from the coach onto the roof as the train was in motion, but won't confirm how he was injured. The transit company calling it terribly dangerous, saying scenes like this are too often tragic and life-altering.
It's shocking, it's upsetting, it's sad.
I wonder what the thing is that's motivating them to do this.
I can only say probably curiosity and seeing other people do it on social media.
In the past couple of years, this video has caught the eye of Toronto police, as have multiple reports of people spotted on moving trains. And last year, a teen died after climbing onto a moving subway train.
The number of incidents has dramatically increased over the past couple of years, seeing teens engaging in these types of behaviors.
Neuroscientist Emma Durden researches the impact of social media on youth and says the not fully developed teenage brain is more prone to risks.
To the point where they're going to the extremes of novelty seeking and engaging in really dangerous behaviors. But at the same time, they can lack awareness about the consequences.
She says social media platforms and legislators have greater roles to play in limiting content.
And it may also be technology that police turn to answer some of the lingering questions about how this troubling incident unfolded along these tracks.
Local residents, businesses, any drivers with dash cam or surveillance video.
Collecting clues and delivering warnings about risky rides and unexpected destinations. Tony Grace, CTV News, Toronto.
A Quebec baseball coach suffered serious injuries when the team bus he was traveling on with dozens of students crashed in Virginia.
All the players are well physically. Some of them are got a little bit of a trauma.
The bus carrying more than 50 people veered off the highway shortly before 3 a.m. Saturday while traveling from Drummondville, northeast of Montreal, to a training camp in Florida. Local media say the driver has been charged with reckless driving. Charges have also been laid against a suspected drunk driver in Michigan who plowed into a boat club hosting a children's birthday party, killing an 8-year-old girl and her 5-year-old brother. Security video shows the vehicle moments before the crash that also left a dozen others hurt. 3 children and 6 adults suffered life-threatening injuries. Police say a 66-year-old woman was taken into custody with additional charges expected. Overseas strikes in southern Gaza have left more than 20 people dead, mostly children. This as Israel's prime minister vowed to increase military and political pressure in the coming days. CTV's Jeremy Sharon reports.
Searching for survivors, this is the scene of the latest Israeli strikes in Rafah. Palestinians watch as rescuers search the rubble. The strikes killed more than 20 people, most of them children, according to Palestinian health officials. My entire identity has been wiped out, this man says. My wife, children, everyone.
There's still intent to target and then eventually conduct some level of ground offensive into Rafah.
In the occupied West Bank today, mourners fired shots into the air at a funeral held for those killed in a multi-day raid here. The IDF claims to have killed 14 terrorists.
The best that can be done in the West Bank is to keep something of a lid on the disturbances there, so that the situation doesn't boil over to the point where it becomes a really grave security threat.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended his military today in response to reports the U.S. is expected to sanction an IDF battalion for its alleged role in human rights abuse against Palestinians in the West Bank. I will fiercely defend the IDF, he said. If someone thinks they can impose sanctions on an IDF unit, I will fight it with all my might. He also vowed to increase military and political pressure in the coming days, calling it the only way to bring home hostages and achieve victory. Now, as Israel and Iran are widely expected to avoid further escalation of a broader regional conflict, Israel's focus, Heather, has shifted back to defeating Hamas on the ground in Gaza.
CTV's Jeremy Sharon in Ottawa. We're just hours away from hearing opening statements in Donald Trump's historic hush money trial. Trump will be forced to sit through every day of the trial, where he's accused of falsifying documents related to a $130,000 payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. It's the first ever criminal trial of a former U.S. president. Small Canadian businesses and startups are raising concerns over the proposed changes to the capital gains tax. The Liberals see it as a plan aimed at wealthy Canadians to achieve tax fairness. Those blasting the budget believe it will have the opposite effect. CTV's Kamal Kramali explains.
The finance minister pumping up the tires of the recently tabled federal budget at this Toronto bike shop today.
We're making it easier to start new businesses.
The budget certainly fanned some flames, especially a proposal on increasing taxes to the wealthy.
If this is supposed to be attacking the wealthy, it's sure going pretty deep. There are tons of small and medium-sized business owners who will be affected by these changes.
Capital gains applies to assets like homes that are not a primary residence and businesses. It's the difference between an asset's cost versus its total sale price. If you purchase a cottage for $500,000 and then later sell it for $600,000, your capital gain is $100,000. Right now, half of your capital gain is taxable. So in this example, $50,000 of the profits is taxed. The 2024 budget would continue having a 50% tax, but for only the first $250,000 in capital gain. Any amount above that would be taxed even more, 2/3 or 66%.
I think it's inevitably going to be pretty detrimental to businesses.
The change likely to hit startups the hardest because of their trouble in accessing consistent funding.
I'm already hearing the number of angel investors saying you're going to be pausing any sort of investment in Canada.
And with less investment and less capital, our workers are likely to be less productive in the future. And as a result, everyone in Canada will probably have lower standards of living.
But the finance minister arguing the tax changes would impact less than 1% of Canadians.
It is only entrepreneurs who are making a capital gain of more than $6.25 million in a year who will be paying a little bit more.
If adopted, the capital gains tax changes would come into effect in late June. Heather.
CTV's Kamal Kramali reporting from Toronto. Ontario and other provinces are caught up in a political tug-of-war with the federal government over how fast homes are being built. A recent snapshot revealed BC is ahead of the curve. Here's CTV's Colton Prale on why some parts of the country are lagging behind.
New builds like these are the focus of governments across Canada, but how quickly homes get built varies immensely. The Prime Minister blames provincial politics.
People in their provinces still deserve to have solutions to the housing crisis, even if the province doesn't want to step up with the same level of ambition.
Relative to population, British Columbia built the most new housing units in the country in March, more than double the rate in Ontario, while Nova Scotia and Alberta are the only other provinces building more than the Canadian average. The BC government credits low-cost financing for builders and introduced building code and zoning changes that can allow up to 6 units on a single property. Ontario Premier Doug Ford recently kiboshed calls for similar zoning changes.
You're seeing the results of the inevitable results of the difference between a targeted, evidence-based approach and a throwing things at the wall approach.
Housing experts say governments can do more, like offering up public lands to incentivize building affordable housing, something Ottawa proposed in its recent budget, and what BC is using to build another 8,000 to 10,000 reasonably priced homes for medium-income Canadians.
These sites are available right across the country, and the governments of all levels can be moving much more quickly to make those lands available, and ensuring that there's an affordable housing piece to each of the projects that go forward.
And while all levels of government race to create more homes and rentals, experts say affordable housing isn't prioritized enough, calling for 20% of all new construction to be low-income housing. Heather.
CTV's Colton Prale in Ottawa. Coming up, searching for answers.
It's body, it's a human, not an animal or something like that.
Grieving a death overseas, a Quebec family receives the wrong body back in Canada. Plus, Indigenous entrepreneurs connecting with a broader community. A family vacation has turned into a never-ending nightmare for a Quebec family. Their trip to Cuba cut short by the sudden death of a husband and father. For weeks, they tried to have his body returned to Canada, only to receive someone else. CTV's Olivia O'Malley reports.
It's been a devastating month for the Jajo family. During a vacation in Cuba, 68-year-old Ferrat Jajo suddenly died. They waited weeks for his body to be sent back to Montreal, and when they finally went to identify the body, it was the wrong man.
Malheureusement, c'est pas le frère de mon père.
Myriam Jajo said the person looked nothing like her father. She says it was a Russian man at least 20 years younger with hair and tattoos. Her father was bald and had no tattoos.
I'm in shock, I cry.
This is the last photo of Jajo before he had a heart attack. Jajo's 2 children say his body and paperwork were taken to a hospital in Havana, and they called the Canadian consulate.
Elle m'a dit, on peut rien faire. Tu dois payer le 10 000 $.
She says the employee said there's nothing he could do, and the family had to pay $10,000 to send the body back to Canada. His death certificate and passport arrived, but his body did not, and no one has any idea where it is.
It's body. It's a human, not an animal or something like that.
The family has tried contacting the Canadian government multiple times.
Ils m'ont dit que c'est pas notre responsabilité, c'est la responsabilité des compagnies.
When they finally reached someone, she says the government said it's not their responsibility. It's the responsibility of Assisteur, a Cuban medical insurance company that delivered the body. However, Jajo's daughter said she was never in contact with the company.
Nous, les Canadiens, on n'est pas protégés au Cuba.
The wrong body has been returned to its country, but the father and husband is still missing. The funeral home told CTV News it is in contact with the Cuban company. It says it's looking for the proper body. And in an email to CTV News, Global Affairs Canada says it is looking into the file. Olivia O'Malley, CTV News, Montreal. A journalist who became one of America's longest-held hostages has died at the age of 76. Terry Anderson was held captive for almost 7 years after he was snatched from a street in war-torn Lebanon in 1985. Tortured and chained to the wall, he eventually returned to the U.S., writing about his experience in his memoir, Den of Lions. Anderson's daughter says he died at his home in New York State as a result of complications from heart surgery. And sad news from the music world, acclaimed British conductor Sir Andrew Davis has died. Davis performed with many of the world's finest orchestras spanning over 5 decades. He was a familiar face leading the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. The city embraced his powerful presence, bearing a street in his name. Davis was 80. Still ahead, Indigenous women in business. The artist partnering with a major retailer to create wellness within the community. Being an entrepreneur can be a daunting task, but it's being tackled head-on by a growing number of Indigenous women. And some are partnering with a major retailer to make their products more accessible. CTV's Donna Sound has more.
This studio is where Angela de Montigny creates her product as a small business owner.
We're calling it the West Wind.
She owns Lodge Soy Candles. This Cree Métis woman creates scents and aromatherapy mists using all natural, traditional ingredients, including sweetgrass, sage, and cedar, to honor, soothe, and replenish.
This is a medicine. These 4 medicines together are what we call a 4 directions medicine. So it's also protection. It immediately calms you.
It is on the shelves of a huge conglomerate of one of the country's largest retail stores. For her and 2 other Indigenous businesswomen, this is a dream come true.
That is us being able to take part in the Canadian economy in a way that we should be able to.
Rexall has created a display area in over 30 stores across the country featuring these 3 Indigenous brands.
We've come through the last 4 years, growing.
Yeah, like
high fives.
Lofton strives making jewelry that is interchangeable and can be used many different ways.
These pieces are the backbone of Lofton because we truly believe in the medicine of creativity.
This is part of Rexall's Reconciliation Project. The pharmaceutical giant is committed to bringing more exposure to the small business, female-led Indigenous community. According to the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, 39% of Indigenous small to medium-sized companies are owned by Indigenous women. And with partnerships like this, that number will only grow. Donna Sound, CTV News, Toronto.
Hawaiian surfer Gabriella Bryan shared a wave with a pod of dolphins as she won her first World Championship event today. This was the Western Australia Margaret River Pro. 22-year-old Bryan is a former Rookie of the Year. She took a commanding lead as a handful of dolphins swooped around her, later calling the moment magical. That will put a smile on your face, and so will this next story. Why laughter may really be the best medicine. Finding joy and humor in everyday moments has helped a BC couple live life to the fullest, even in the face of hardship. And the trick to helping them heal? Laughter. Here's CTV's Adam Sawatsky on their enduring love story.
As Sarah Kendall and Jean Furby look back on their love story, they can't help but laugh.
It was a natural thing. It seemed to fit.
Back when Jean began teaching laughter yoga. After discovering that if you start to laugh deliberately, you'll eventually find yourself unable to stop laughing genuinely.
To let go and just let the body take over.
But letting go physically can be a challenge when you're carrying around so much emotionally.
It was an aneurysm, and it was a stroke in my brain.
After being hospitalized in a coma for months, Sarah was left partially paralyzed.
It was a thoroughly horrible thing.
The situation often seemed hopeless until the couple happened upon a laughter yoga demonstration and decided to give it a try. While the benefit for Jean was immediate,
I said, I've got to learn how to do this.
For Sarah, it was a bit more of a struggle.
I would fake it till I make it, and I would start to laugh.
It also inspired the couple to stop resisting life's challenges.
You realize that this is the way it is, and here I am.
and start searching for the potential gift in even the most adverse of moments.
And I wanted to love the most that I could, and every day.
Which is why Sarah says she now feels grateful for her stroke, because it's inspired both of them to live a more loving life.
She's a bright light. Yeah, she is.
And Jean, she says, is genuinely joyful.
We love each other.
Adam Sawatsky, CTV News, Esquimalt.
Some beautiful advice. That's our newscast. I'm Heather Butts. For all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Omar and Sandy are here tomorrow, and I'll see you again on Friday. Good night.
We're seeing a vicious anti-Semitism, a vicious hatred of Israel in our universities, and sadly among the Democrat Party. This party has turned hard anti-Israel because they're terrified of their rabid core. And on campus, you see really the id of the Democrat Party expressed. And you want to know why this is happening? This, tragically, is cultural Marxism. Yeah. Our universities are indoctrinating young people. Cultural Marxism breaks the world into oppressors and victims. Yeah. And they have defined Jews as oppressors. Yeah. They have defined Palestinians as victims. Sadly, it's a really ugly manifestation we're seeing on the streets of New York and across the country in universities.
Yeah, I think he makes a great point. It's not just like the squad that's pro-Palestinian. It's the idea that, and I'll take oppressor and add colonizer. Right. That's something the Democrat liberal left has really indoctrinated into universities and told people that's all we are, the West.
That was a great interview. I watched the entire interview. And one point that Ted Cruz also made is about Chuck Schumer, who's a New York senator, Nancy Pelosi, and others. Where are they on this? And Lisa, by the way, your point about the White House and the Charlottesville lie, Karine Jean-Pierre repeated again just a day ago on the podium, I think, while talking to Peter Doocy. So they push the lie. The thing about cultural Marxism, and I've dug into a lot of these over the years, so I started looking at the groups that are there with these protesters. You've got PSL Web, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. They're there on site. I've been there with, in encampments, covered them over the years. You've got RevCom, Revolutionary Communists, another group. You've got, for those of you watching, go to Marxist.com. They launched in New York about 6 weeks ago with a telecast around the country and gatherings in Dallas, other areas. They're about to launch internationally. This is RCA, Revolutionary Communist America. These are the groups that are using this as well, in this energy. And in this case, the target is the Jews. But it's really this cultural Marxism mixed with a common hatred of Jews. And if you think about it, that's what's caused the deaths of more Jews worldwide than just about anything. You've got Hitler as a Nazi and communists.
Alicia, even if the politics, even if this bred hatred is an after effect of what they're trying to do, to just create a victimhood among people in college, you understand what it's like to have children at college age in college. This isn't just something that's happening in Columbia. USC had to take a valedictorian off the stage for their upcoming commencement because I guess she's pro-Palestinian and they were afraid she was going to incite a reaction with her remarks. And then at Yale today, a student was stabbed in the eye that is described as a Jewish student journalist by the New York Post. And this is what she had to say after being stabbed in the eye. She said, "There's hundreds of people taunting me and waving the middle finger at me. And then this person waves a Palestinian flag in my face and jabs it in my eye. When I tried to yell and go after him, the protesters got on the line and stopped me." In the New York Post piece, it talks about how the police, in her words, told her they could not help her. That's very concerning.
Well, yeah, and the lack of humanity for the people who stood between her and the cops, the people who got in line and didn't even go to help her. There's a significant lack of humanity that I think has happened. And also, since October 7th, we've seen these protests around the country on different college campuses. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like in the last 48 hours, something else has changed. It's gotten so much worse, and we're at such an inflection point where it's so dangerous that it requires more of the White House than just a statement. Because now we're talking about a rabbi coming out and telling Jewish students, quote, "leave as soon as possible." As a reporter, I only hear those words from state leaders when they're telling people to get out of the way of a hurricane or a tornado or a rising water because there's going to be a flood and they could lose their life almost immediately. But this is being told to students who made it into the Ivy League, their parents, their families, so proud. They worked so hard. The biggest challenge for them should be academic, not whether or not they're going to survive getting across campus. Something has changed in the last 48 hours. I think the White House needs to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I love your description of this being like an impending natural disaster, because the idea being, does the hurricane hit shore or does it not? Can the tensions lower from these, or does this Yale student getting stabbed in the eye become the first of a series of violence? We hope no violence comes from this and that all tensions are calmed down.
Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Capitol Hill, the House has approved a $95 billion foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The House also approved a bill that could lead to a ban on the social media app TikTok. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson pushed the bills forward despite growing Republican calls for him to resign, in part over support for supporting $61 billion in aid to Ukraine. The Ukraine bill passed by a vote of 311 to 112. Every Democrat who voted supported the measure. The $26 billion Israel aid bill passed by a vote of 366 to 58. 37 Democrats and 21 Republicans opposed the bill. Opponents of the bill included Texas Democratic Congressmember Joaquin Castro.
All of us have seen the tragedy of Gaza. We've seen how Prime Minister Netanyahu's government has used American weapons to kill indiscriminately, to force famine. Over 25,000 women and children dead. Tens of thousands of missiles and bombs levied on innocent civilians. We cannot escape what we see before us every day. Are we going to participate in that carnage or not? I choose not to.
In Gaza, Palestinian civil defense workers have found at least 210 bodies buried in a mass grave in the courtyard of the Nasser Medical Complex in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. The discovery comes 2 weeks after Israeli forces withdrew from the hospital. Al Jazeera reports many of the bodies found included children, young men, and older women. Some reportedly had their hands tied behind their backs. Palestinians have been searching the hospital grounds for bodies of loved ones killed during the Israeli siege.
It is a difficult scene. Beyond what you can imagine. It is a difficult scene for someone to bring back the body of a dear human being.
The official death toll in Gaza has topped 34,000, including more than 14,000 children. Over the weekend, Israeli strikes on Rafah killed at least 22 people, including 18 children. One of the strikes killed a Palestinian man, his wife, who was 30 weeks pregnant, and their 4-year-old daughter. Doctors at a nearby hospital performed an emergency cesarean section on the dead mother and delivered her child. Dr. Mohammed Salama is the head of the neonatal intensive care unit at Al Emirati Hospital in Rafah.
The baby girl came out in a tragic situation. She came out and found herself an orphan directly. Came into life without care. As soon as she came, she had a moderate to severe respiratory distress. The name that came out was Baby of a Martyr. And this in itself, a hard word, a tragic word. Even as we write this label, our hands tremble. The thing is hard.
In the occupied West Bank, Palestinians staged a general strike Sunday after Israeli forces killed at least 14 Palestinians during a 50-hour siege on the Nur Shams refugee camp in the city of Tulkarm. Residents of Nur Shams said the Israeli raid left the camp uninhabitable.
Seeing it is not like hearing about it. You can see with your eyes what happened. Destruction. Gaza number 2. What happened is that they left no trees, nor people, nor stones. It is unbearable, uninhabitable by humans. What happened is destruction. Destruction. They turned the camp into something uninhabitable. It is terrible.
In a separate incident, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society reports Israeli settlers shot dead a Palestinian ambulance driver south of Nablus as he was trying to reach Palestinians injured during a raid by Israeli settlers. Mohammed Awad al-Musa was a 50-year-old volunteer paramedic with the Palestine Red Crescent. This comes as the Biden administration is reportedly preparing to issue sanctions on Netza Yehuda Battalion, an ultra-Orthodox Israeli military unit accused of committing human rights abuses against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. In other news, Israel's chief of military intelligence has resigned. Major General Aharon Haliva is the first senior Israeli official to resign over Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. In his resignation letter, Haliva wrote, quote, "The intelligence directorate under my command did not live up to the task we were entrusted with." He also called for a state commission to investigate intelligence failures prior to October 7th. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid praised Haliva's decision to resign and called on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to follow suit. Columbia University has canceled in-person classes today as campus protests over the war on Gaza enter a 6th day. Classes will be held online today as the campus remains largely locked down. The protests have swelled after the arrest last week of over 100 students who'd set up an encampment to call for the school to divest from Israel. Organizers say at least 50 students have been suspended from Barnard and 35 from Columbia. A growing number of Columbia and Barnard alumni, employees, and guest speakers have also publicly condemned or announced they're boycotting the prestigious institutions. Meanwhile, Gaza solidarity protests and encampments have begun on campuses across the country, including at Yale, MIT, Tufts, NYU, the New School, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Officials at USC, that's the University of Southern California, have canceled all outside speakers at this year's graduation ceremonies, including John Chu, the director of Crazy Rich Asians, and tennis legend Billie Jean King. The decision comes days after the school sparked outrage by canceling a speech by the valedictorian Asna Tabassum over what the school claimed were safety reasons. Tabassum is a first-generation South Asian American Muslim who'd expressed support for Palestinians. President Biden has signed legislation to reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, despite warnings from privacy experts that the bill could greatly expand the ability for the government to conduct warrantless domestic surveillance. The Senate approved the FISA bill Friday in a 60-34 vote. Critics include Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, who described the bill as, quote, one of the most dramatic and terrifying expansions of government surveillance authority in history.
If you have access to any communications, the government can force you to help it spy. That means anybody with access to a server, a wire, a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, a phone, or a computer. If this provision is enacted, the government can deputize any of these people against their will and force them, in effect, to become what amounts to an agent for Big Brother.
Opening arguments begin today in Donald Trump's criminal trial. He's the first former president to ever be criminally charged. Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to hide $130,000 paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels to impact the 2016 election. 12 jurors and 6 alternates have been sworn in. On Friday, a man set himself on fire in a park outside the Manhattan criminal courthouse where Trump is being tried. 37-year-old Max Azzarello died hours later. Friends of the man said he'd become consumed with conspiracy theories in recent years. In Ecuador, voters overwhelmingly supported a referendum approving President Daniel Noboa's security plan for tackling gang-related crime. The new measures include expanding military and police authority, tightening gun control, lengthening prison sentences for certain offenses, and imposing stricter penalties for crimes considered to be acts of terrorism. The Sunday vote came as a prison warden in the western state of Manabí was shot dead. 2 days earlier, the mayor of the mining town of Portobello was killed, the third Ecuadorian mayor to be assassinated in less than a month. President Noboa declared an internal armed conflict in January. Some rights groups warn Noboa's crackdown will lead to more abuses by officials. The spiraling security crisis and severe drought conditions have forced tens of thousands of Ecuadorians to flee towards the U.S.-Mexico border. The U.S. military has announced it will withdraw troops from Niger and close down a major drone base that it built 6 years ago. On Sunday, hundreds of protesters in Niger marched in Agadez to demand the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops. This comes as Russia strengthens ties with the U.S.-trained military junta in Niger, which seized power last year in a coup. In labor news, Volkswagen employees at a Chattanooga, Tennessee factory have overwhelmingly voted to join the United Auto Workers Union. The plant will become the first foreign-owned factory in the South to unionize. The decisive victory comes in the wake of the historic strike and contract gains with the U.S. auto industry's big 3 companies last year. The UAW has pledged to unionize auto workers across the United States. On Sunday, UAW President Shawn Fain spoke at a conference organized by Labor Notes.
4,000 workers in Chattanooga, Tennessee did what many people said was impossible. You know, we did what the pundits said couldn't be done. Every time I was interviewed by people when we talked about organizing the South, they would always do an eye roll and say, do you really think you can win in the South? And you know what? Those workers stood up for themselves. That's how we won, and they voted for a union.
The Biden administration's updated Title IX rules codifying the rights of transgender students and undoing some of the Trump-era rollbacks of the landmark civil rights law. The new rules expand sex discrimination and harassment to include LGBTQ discrimination as Republicans around the country escalate attacks on transgender children. The new rules also increase protections for pregnant people and survivors of sexual assault in schools. In California, 3 officers have been charged with involuntary manslaughter in the 2021 police killing of Mario Gonzalez. The Alameda County District Attorney reopened the case against Eric McKinley, James Fisher, and Cameron Leahy after the preceding DA closed it in 2022. 26-year-old Mario Gonzalez was alone in a park when the officers violently arrested him, kneeling on his body until he became unresponsive. Gonzalez left behind a young son. In China, at least 3 people have died while authorities evacuated another 60,000 people from their homes as massive floods have inundated parts of Guangdong province after record-breaking rains. And here in the United States, President Biden's announcing a $7 billion investment in solar energy in an Earth Day speech at Virginia's Prince William Forest today. The Biden campaign is hoping to capitalize on young voter support for climate policies as Biden's popularity dwindles amidst the ongoing war on Gaza. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
Tonight, Ukraine gets a lifeline to hold off defeat. After months of political battles, the House passes a series of bills giving billions to Ukraine and other foreign allies.
I'm sorry, democracy is kind of a messy business, and the reality is, it's done.
House Speaker Mike Johnson facing a mutiny from rebel Republicans. What happens next and why the clock may be ticking for TikTok. Also tonight, Israel pounds Gaza as violence in the West Bank surges.
I'm Deborah Patter in the West Bank city of Tulpur, where residents are mopping up the damage after a 2-day Israeli military operation.
Plus, historic trial.
I'm Chanel Call in New York, where in just hours, opening statements will be heard in the first ever criminal trial of a former president.
Deadly crash. A suspected drunk driver plows into a birthday party celebration. At least 2 children are killed. Plus, the cicadas are coming. Why this year's invaders could number in the trillions. And later, price shock. Why costs are soaring at every turn for American drivers.
I'm Jeff Newman in Los Angeles. Car shoppers are facing sticker shock from their asking price to insurance coverage.
This is the CBS Weekend News from New York with Jerika Duncan.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on this Sunday. Tonight, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is urging the United States to send weapons to frontline forces fighting Russian invaders, quote, as soon as possible. Zelensky also praised the House of Representatives for approving billions in foreign aid this weekend that will unleash a flood of American military equipment. But it didn't happen without a fight from hard right Republicans. CBS's Skylar Henry is on Capitol Hill tonight. Skylar, as we know, the Senate is expected to pass this bill in the coming days.
Yeah, Jerika, good evening to you. They could pass this as soon as Tuesday, but the victory lap comes following 6 months of Republican infighting that could put the House speakership in jeopardy again. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the $95 billion bipartisan foreign aid package passed in the House on Saturday will help keep the war with Russia from expanding.
This aid will strengthen Ukraine and send the Kremlin a powerful signal that it will not be the second Afghanistan.
There's more than $60 billion in assistance set aside for Kyiv, including nearly $14 billion to help Ukraine buy advanced weapon systems and defense equipment.
Well, the great news is this is finally happening. It should have happened 6 months ago.
For months, hard-right members of the House vehemently opposed more aid for Ukraine, including Speaker Mike Johnson before he received the gavel. On Saturday, more than half of House Republicans voted no to the measure, leaving Johnson to rely on Democratic support. Now, a small but growing number of Republicans are openly calling to oust Johnson, saying there should be more focus on domestic issues, including the crisis at the border.
He has completely betrayed Republican voters all over the country, and he is absolutely working for the Democrats.
I don't walk around this building being worried about a motion to vacate. I have to do my job. We did.
Now, there is a pushback from Democrats and Republicans even in terms of any sort of effort to oust Johnson. Also, we should point out that in addition to the foreign aid, the House passed a measure Saturday that would ban TikTok in the U.S. if the app's parent company does not divest from China. The company says that if that were to become law, then it would violate the First Amendment rights of millions of users.
And we'll see what happens with that. Skylar, switching topics, it's a packed final week of oral arguments at the Supreme Court. Give us a sense of what we can expect there.
Yeah, the justices will perhaps hear the most consequential case on homelessness in decades. They'll consider whether it's cruel and unusual punishment to fine or jail someone who is sleeping outside with no place to go. But the main event, if you will, Jerika, will be later on this week, as the justices will also consider whether former President Trump is immune from criminal charges stemming from his efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Skylar Henry on Capitol Hill tonight. Thank you. To the Middle East, where this weekend Israeli Defense Forces launched a deadly series of airstrikes on the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, and violence also flared in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. CBS's Deborah Patta is in Jerusalem with more on the impact to children and a warning some of the images are disturbing.
Good evening. Every 10 minutes, a child is killed in Gaza, according to the United Nations. That's nearly 15,000 children in almost 7 months.
Rushed into this world far too early and already an orphan. This doctor works efficiently to help the baby girl breathe, her lungs not yet fully developed. Her mother, Sabrina Sakani, was 6 months pregnant when she was killed in an Israeli airstrike in Rafah last night. But miraculously, doctors managed to save the preterm infant. Nobody else survived the hit on 2 houses. Among the dead, 13 children, the youngest just 2 years old. Here, Israeli Defense Force soldiers prepare for a different mission. But this is not in Gaza. It's IDF footage in the West Bank city of Tulkarem, where they say they conducted a counter-terrorism operation, killing 14 militants in close combat.
Residents are now cleaning up after the operation. What the Israeli military does is it uses bulldozers to dig up the roads. You can see they've been completely destroyed, making sure that residents cannot move freely in the area.
Bulldozers also smashed through anything that stood in their way. Homes and shops were damaged, pipes and power lines severed, cutting off water and electricity. The Israeli military is in the global spotlight right now. A US official told CBS News that since 2022, it's been investigating an IDF unit of ultra-Orthodox soldiers stationed in the West Bank, accused of human rights atrocities, with an announcement expected this week.
Media reports suggesting the unit could be blacklisted from receiving US military aid prompted an angry outburst from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who said sanctions against an IDF unit would be a moral low, Jerika, at a time when his country was fighting in Gaza.
Deborah Patta in Jerusalem, we thank you for your reporting. Tonight we learned of the death of a former Associated Press reporter, Terry Anderson. You may remember him as one of America's longest held hostages after he was kidnapped from a street in war-torn Lebanon back in 1985 and held for nearly 7 years. Terry Anderson died in Greenwood Lake, New York. He was 76 years old. A historic day in New York tomorrow where opening statements will be heard in the first criminal trial of former President Donald Trump. CBS's Chanel Call is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Chanel.
And Jerika, after a week of being stuck inside this Manhattan courthouse during jury selection, former President Donald Trump was set to attend a campaign rally in North Carolina last night, but was forced to cancel due to stormy weather.
I think we're going to have to just do a rain check. I'm so sad.
Speaking to supporters over a loudspeaker, former President Donald Trump called off what would have been his first campaign event since his New York City criminal hush money trial began.
This is really a concerted witch hunt.
Trump is required to be in court daily, often stopping on his way in or out to rail against the case, accusing him of falsifying business records to hide an alleged affair ahead of the 2016 presidential election. He's pleaded not guilty to 34 felony counts. The 12 jurors and 6 alternates chosen last week will be the first American jury to judge their former president.
There are studies that say that 80% of jurors' minds are made up at the end of opening statements, and it's very difficult to change someone's mind if they've made that initial decision.
Prosecutors are also expected to call their first witness Monday. So, Ricky, why don't we know who will be testifying tomorrow?
Judge Merchan feels very strongly that if the witnesses are known to the defense and to the defendant, that they will be harassed by the defendant on social media, and that those witnesses may be intimidated about their testimony or their safety may be in danger.
And tomorrow, 2 of the former president's trials will overlap. Just down the street from here, New York Attorney General Letitia James will ask a judge to reject the $175 million bond payment in Donald Trump's New York civil fraud case. This over new concerns about the company's finances and legitimacy. Jerika?
Chanel Call for us in Manhattan, thank you. Tonight, police in Chicago are investigating the shooting death of an off-duty officer. A procession of law enforcement officials gathered outside the University of Chicago Hospital where 30-year-old Luis Huesca was pronounced dead. The city's police superintendent says Huesca was shot 6 times just before 3 o'clock this morning as he was returning home from his shift. The officer's vehicle was taken from the crime scene and later recovered. Police say a 66-year-old woman faces a bond hearing tomorrow after crashing her car into a building, killing 2 children and injuring several others. CBS's Lana Zach has the latest.
We have a black Escape that went through the building.
The horror unfolded Saturday in Monroe County, about 30 miles south of Detroit. This SUV seen speeding before, plowing 25 feet into a building where kids and their parents were attending a birthday party.
We have several people on the ground, as well as several children injured.
First responders described the scene as chaotic with high levels of emotion.
It sounds like we have a 4-year-old trapped underneath the vehicle. Unknown life status at this time.
A total of 15 people, including at least 3 children, were rushed to area hospitals by helicopter, ambulances, and private cars. Some with life-threatening injuries remain in critical condition.
2 of the victims were pronounced deceased at the scene. This includes an 8-year-old female and a 5-year-old male, who are siblings of each other.
The driver, a 66-year-old female, was arrested and charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated. Authorities, who have not released her name, say she will likely face other criminal charges. Lana Zach, CBS News, New York.
Well, today, video was released of a remarkable rescue in Minnesota. Good Samaritans jumped into action Thursday along Interstate 94 in St. Paul after a car hit a guardrail and then burst into flames. They made several attempts to open the vehicle's door. Finally, the driver was pulled out through the window. Police say no serious injuries were reported. Scientists say this spring will bring a rare invasion of cicadas. So rare, it hasn't happened since 1803. For all you history buffs, that's the same year Napoleon sold the Louisiana Territory to Thomas Jefferson. Here's Emily Fannin of our CBS affiliate, WDJT in Milwaukee.
Around mid-May, cicada noise will be in full swing. And while this high-pitched buzzing occurs every year throughout the Midwest, experts say this year will be unique due to a rare emergence of cicadas that hasn't happened since the 1800s.
We just had that solar eclipse recently. You only have so many opportunities in your life to see and witness something like that. And the cicadas are very similar.
PJ Leash is an extension entomologist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also referred to as the Wisconsin bug guy.
These are the cicadas that we'll be seeing emerge in large numbers this year.
Parts of southern Wisconsin will experience these periodical cicadas, which only emerge every 13 or 17 years, a cycle scientists don't have a clear answer for. They're referred to as broods, and more than a dozen states will experience these 2 types of cicadas at the same time, which Leach says will create a much louder and at times annoying noise.
Say a grove of trees behind us with singing male cicadas, that might be in the range of 70 to 80 decibels, which could be similar to a vacuum cleaner. But if you are really close, it could be more in the range of 90 to 100 decibels, which is really, really loud.
While the noise from cicadas can be a little disruptive, overall they do produce some environmental benefits, such as being a valuable food source for insects and other predators, as well as improving water filtration into the ground.
That is going to be very similar impacts if you pay to have your lawn aerated.
The cicadas are expected in big numbers, hundreds of trillions of them, maybe more, across 16 states. For CBS News, Emily Fannin, Madison, Wisconsin.
Straight ahead on the CBS Weekend News, the rising cost of getting and staying behind the wheel. Plus, a legendary lodge is shining once again. Stay with us. Drivers are facing the worst sticker shock in a generation. Take used car prices. They now average $25,600. That's nearly 25% higher than 5 years ago. From loans to insurance, costs are soaring at every turn. In tonight's Weekend Journal, CBS's Jeff Nguyen in Los Angeles explains some of the reasons why.
There you go. There you go.
Karen and Marissa Hood and baby Noah have been looking for a new car since January, only to find sticker shock.
Now you're looking at the payments and it's just kind of crazy.
Last month, the average price of a new car was just under $47,000, and the average new car payment was north of $700. Also in March, the average interest rate for a new car loan was more than 7%, used nearly 12%. As for finding something affordable,
the 20,000 vehicle's dead. If you want a $20,000 vehicle, you're buying a used car.
What will it take for prices to turn around?
In the end, if consumers don't buy, prices will come down.
Things may be turning around. Bo Bachman owns a car dealership group in Los Angeles where inventory has been sitting longer.
Now we're getting incentives back. Most of our interest rates are between 2.9 and 0%.
But then there's the cost of insurance. The latest consumer price index shows a 22% increase over last year. Safety features, do they affect insurance rates?
There's backup cameras, there's sensors. All these things cost quite a bit more to repair. So a bumper went from being $1,000 repair to maybe a $10,000, $20,000 repair. Come here.
The Hoods recently purchased a used Tesla. They're looking to add a 3-year-old Ford Explorer priced at $40,000.
We're looking at new cars and we realized that we could get 2 used cars.
The New York Fed says auto loan delinquencies are at their highest level since 2008 because of higher prices and ballooning interest rates. Jeff Nguyen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Still ahead on the CBS Weekend News, Let's Dance, a Footloose finale, and farewell at an iconic high school. That's Kevin Bacon in the 1984's Footloose. The film's prom scene took place at a high school in Payson, Utah 40 years ago. Well, this weekend, Bacon returned to Payson and kicked off his Sunday shoes. You get it? The school launched the hashtag Bacon to Payson to get the actor to visit. It worked. The building is closing next month. Another 80s film making news tonight, The Shining. That's because of the Oregon Lodge where the movie was filmed is back open for guests. A fire broke out in the attic of the historic Timberline Lodge in Mount Hood last week, forcing staff and guests to evacuate. Luckily, no one was hurt. Tomorrow, a big birthday at Disneyland. The It's a Small World turned 60 years old. The attraction was built for the 1964 World's Fair in New York and later moved to Walt Disney's new theme park in Anaheim, California in 1966. Next on the CBS Weekend News, how a tropical forest project in Puerto Rico is providing a window into our warming world. Tomorrow is Earth Day. A new CBS News poll finds 2/3 of Americans think it is their responsibility to do something about climate change right now. One scientist is going to great lengths to do her part. Here's CBS's David Schechter.
A hotspot for research. That's one way to think of this plot of Puerto Rican forest strung with high voltage lines.
Hi, I'm Tana.
David. Dr. Tana Wood is a research ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service who studies how tropical forests will respond to climate change.
How can we get this window into a future warmer world hundreds of years into the future?
Those black panels are electric heaters running 24/7, warming up this plot of the jungle by 7 degrees Fahrenheit. She says worst case scenario, that's how much warmer it could be on Earth by the end of the century if we keep emitting heat-trapping carbon from our cars, factories, and power plants. This experiment was interrupted by Hurricane Maria in 2017, and ever since, the plants in the heated section have struggled to recover. Dead leaves, stunted growth. This looks totally different.
We have begun to notice that the forest has become shorter and shorter as time has gone on, and so you can visibly see that the forest is experiencing stress under these conditions.
When trees and plants die and decay, they release carbon. Fortunately, healthy trees and soil absorb more carbon than what's being released, but Wood is finding their ability to keep doing that might be in jeopardy. The team is making hundreds of measurements of the forest, recording the growth of plants, looking underground at the health of the root system, and this device records how much carbon the soil is releasing.
So after 1 year of warming, we saw a major increase in the amount of carbon dioxide that was coming out of these soils.
Her experiment is showing us rising temperatures cause forests to release more carbon. More carbon in the atmosphere causes the planet to get warmer, and the cycle continues.
What happens in these ecosystems has far-reaching consequences for the climate as a whole.
David Schechter, CBS News, Puerto Rico.
Well, coming up on 60 Minutes, Anderson Cooper joins comedian Kevin Hart in the gym. For now, that's the CBS Weekend News for this Sunday. We thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jerika Duncan in New York. Have a great night.
Tonight, the full 12-person jury now selected in Donald Trump's hush money trial after 2 jurors were dismissed. The judge declaring we have our jury after seating the 12 people who will decide the former president's fate, including an investment banker, a retired private wealth manager,
and what we're learning about the investigation. Bystanders spring into action. They're heroic. Tonight, we're following several developing stories, security concerns, and a warning to Jewish. Tonight, we're following several developing stories, security concerns, and a warning to Jewish students on the eve of Passover, the April freeze that could impact millions, and more turmoil in Congress, why the House Speaker's job may once again be on the line. First, the NYPD is ramping up security ahead of Passover, cautioning that Jewish people and institutions are possible targets. And now a prominent rabbi at Columbia University is advising Jewish students to stay off campus because of what he calls extreme anti-Semitism. The university largely on lockdown amid growing pro-Palestinian protests. 65 million Americans in 20 states are under freeze warnings tonight. Farmers keeping a close eye on their crops. Big change on the horizon after this April freeze. Our weather team times it all out. House Speaker Mike Johnson faces yet another battle to keep his job after the House approved new aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Some Republicans are vowing to trigger a vote to remove Johnson, while others are calling him a profile in courage. And with America's adversaries monitoring all this very closely, will Democrats come to Johnson's rescue? What's next for TikTok? That House vote calls for the social media giant to be sold to an American company or face a possible ban. Will the Senate do the same? The Chinese government and the company both weighing in. And a reality check. Would Congress really ban an app used by 170 million Americans? Tragedy in Michigan. A car crashes into a building right into a birthday party. A 5-year-old boy and his 8-year-old sister both killed. The female driver taken into custody, accused of driving while intoxicated. A Chicago police officer is killed, shot multiple times while on his way home from work. The procession by fellow officers, and what we're learning about the investigation. Bystanders spring into action, their heroic effort risking their own lives to rescue a driver from a burning car. Country star Morgan Wallen apologizes after being hit with felony charges for throwing a chair from the roof of a 6-story building, narrowly missing police officers. And as we observe Earth Day, we honor the volunteers dedicated to cleaning up the Great Lakes.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. I'm Lindsay Davis. As we come on the air, New York authorities are issuing a warning ahead of Passover. Officials say the holiday, which begins tomorrow, may serve as a catalyst for extremist groups and individuals to commit acts of violence against Jewish faith-based communities. This comes as tensions are rising at Columbia University here in New York over the Israel-Hamas war. More than 100 people have been arrested in recent days. A rabbi at the school confirms to ABC News that he strongly recommended to Jewish students that they go home and not return to campus because of what he called extreme anti-Semitism at the school. A New York congresswoman is calling for the university's president to resign. New York's mayor says he's horrified and disgusted by the anti-Semitism. Tonight, the White House is condemning calls for violence against Jewish students. ABC's Rena Roy leads us off.
Tonight, the NYPD issuing an alarming warning on the eve of Passover, saying in a bulletin obtained by ABC News that extremist groups may view the holiday as an opportunity to perpetrate acts of violence or intimidation against Jewish faith-based communities. Though the document cites no specific threats, it adds Jewish people and institutions continue to be the target of violent attacks, targeted harassment, hate crimes, and threats, especially since the onset of the Israel-Hamas war. It comes after a rabbi associated with New York City's Columbia University told Jewish students to go home this week following pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campus. Writing today in an email, Columbia University's public safety and the NYPD cannot guarantee Jewish students' safety. Those protests began after the school's president was grilled on Capitol Hill about anti-Semitism on campus.
There's evidence of anti-Semitism among professors on your faculty?
We have seen some cases, and there have been consequences.
More than 100 demonstrators arrested on campus Thursday. The White House saying the Department of Education has launched an investigation into the incident.
When students are subject to hostile environments because of their faith or ethnicity, schools must act. Students must be safe to learn.
And Lindsay, tonight Columbia is responding, saying that they are listening to the concerns of Jewish students and providing additional support, adding that students have a right to protest but not to disrupt campus life or intimidate others. Lindsay?
And students at several universities are now planning rallies in solidarity with Columbia protesters. Rena, thank you. More than 65 million people across 20 states are under freeze and frost alerts tonight. Temperatures in some places feel more like February than late April. ABC meteorologist Samara Theodore joins us now. Samara, how long is this cold snap expected to last?
Well, the worst of the cold snap, Lindsay, is hitting those in the Midwest tonight. Take a look. This map showing the frost advisory in place for states like Ohio, Michigan, down into Tennessee, and we even have a freeze warning for parts of central Pennsylvania, waking up the temperatures tomorrow in the 20s and 30s. Meanwhile, a different story farther west, where we saw snow in Denver recently. We're looking at a quick warm-up. Temperatures Monday in the upper 70s, by Wednesday nearing 80 degrees. And a lot of this heat helping to fuel those storms that we're anticipating at the end of the week. Lindsay?
Looking forward to those near 80-degree days, Samara. Thank you. Tonight, 24 hours after the House passed that massive foreign aid package, the fate of Speaker Mike Johnson remains uncertain. 3 Republicans have come out in favor of a motion to vacate the Speaker over his support of the $95 billion measure, which includes assistance for Ukraine. Johnson now needs Democrats to help him keep his job. ABC's Jay O'Brien reports in tonight from Capitol Hill.
Tonight, Mike Johnson's future as Speaker of the House in jeopardy. Hardline members of his own party dedicated to ousting him after just 6 months on the job.
Mike Johnson's speakership is over.
After the dramatic Saturday vote where Democrats helped the Speaker pass $95 billion in aid, including long-stalled assistance for Ukraine and Israel. Johnson telling me he's not going anywhere.
Do you believe you will still be the Speaker come November?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, without question.
Yes.
2 other Republicans now joining Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene in her campaign to topple the Speaker.
The House is in chaos. Part of the reason we're doing this is to get us back out of chaos.
Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCall saying the Speaker told confidants he wanted to be on the right side of history.
I think the respect for him has gone way up because he did the right thing irrespective of his job.
Far-right Republicans angry the Speaker didn't focus instead on passing strict border security legislation. But those same GOP lawmakers rejecting a bipartisan border bill from the Senate 2 months ago at the direction of former President Donald Trump. In a rare move, moderate Democrats praising the Republican Speaker.
I frankly do not believe his speakership is at risk.
But progressive Democrats not jumping at the chance to save the embattled conservative Speaker.
Doing the decent thing as allies and friends of various nations and countries, that's just doing the bare minimum.
And Lindsay, Congresswoman Greene hasn't even fully committed to calling for a vote to oust Johnson, saying she instead wants him to resign. But the Speaker has been clear he won't. Lindsay.
Johnson sounds confident. Jay, thank you. A potential TikTok ban is part of that legislation the Senate is expected to take up on Tuesday. Let's bring in ABC's Mary Alice Parks, who joins us now at the White House. Mary Alice, what happens to the foreign aid package if TikTok were to be taken out?
Yeah, Lindsay, stripping TikTok out of this package could force part of the legislation back to the House to start this process all over. Now, the latest version gives ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, a year to sell instead of 6 months. After that time, it could face a ban in the U.S. And some key Democrats, like Senate Commerce Committee Chair Maria Cantwell, say that with those changes, they now back it. Now, TikTok boasts of nearly 170 million users in the U.S., some writing into the White House scene protesting against any potential ban. But the White House staff told me Friday that President Biden would sign the bill if it reaches his desk, though they did push back on the idea of calling it simply a ban. Now, the expectation now is that the fight moves on to the courts. Opponents say that a bill like this is just unconstitutional. Those pushing it, Lindsay, say that TikTok is a national security threat that has to be addressed. Lindsay?
A lot of interest here. Mary Alice from the White House, thanks so much. Former President Trump is returning to a Manhattan courtroom tomorrow for opening statements in his hush money trial. Trump spent most of last week at the defense table as a jury of 12 plus 6 alternates were chosen. The presumptive Republican nominee is unable to campaign, but is trying to use the trial to his political advantage. There's ABC senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katursky.
Tonight, hours from opening statements in his historic criminal trial, former President Trump is facing the realities of being a criminal defendant. In an email to supporters, Trump complaining he is trapped in court, where starting tomorrow he will have to sit silently while prosecutors set out to prove he falsified business records to keep a porn star's long-denied claim of an extramarital affair from damaging his electoral prospects. Among the early witnesses, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, who prosecutors say agreed to be the eyes and ears of Trump's 2016 campaign by identifying damaging stories about Trump and keeping them out of print. The jury of 7 men and 5 women was selected from a pool of 200 New Yorkers. There's a woman in product development who said she doesn't like Trump, and a retired wealth manager who said he has no strong opinion of Trump because he's more interested in his hobbies. Ahead of opening statements, Trump's allies today echoed his claim the trial is political.
I'm hoping that this judge makes the right decision, hoping these jurors can come in and be unbiased, and we'll let this case go forward in a swift manner that allows President Trump to get back on the campaign trail. Americans deserve to hear from their candidates.
Aaron Katursky joins us now. Of course, trial set to begin tomorrow. Expected to last about 6 weeks, give or take. Of course, Donald Trump has said that he plans to testify. How likely do you think that is?
Let's see what his lawyers think about that. And one of the deciding factors, Lindsay, may be how far prosecutors can go in their cross-examination. We're waiting for a judge's decision about that. Even if he doesn't testify, Trump needs to be in court every day the trial is in session. So that takes him off the campaign trail 4 days a week. He can speak in the hallway as he often does, but once he's seated at the defense table, Trump is largely relegated to silence.
And of course, the defense wants some parameters if he is to take the witness.
Oh, they sure do.
All right, Aaron Katursky for us. Thanks so much. Authorities in Michigan are searching for answers after a horrific tragedy at a children's birthday party. A brother and sister, just 5 and 8 years old, died after a car driven by a woman suspected of being intoxicated slammed into the place where the party was being held. Here's ABC's Ike Kajachi.
Tonight, a deadly tragedy allegedly involving an intoxicated driver in Michigan.
And we have a black Escape that went through the building.
Authorities say a 66-year-old woman drove her car into a building during a children's birthday party at a boat club south of Detroit. This security footage capturing the horrifying final moments as the vehicle speeds past, causing a loud crash. 2 children dying at the scene.
An 8-year-old female and a 5-year-old male. Who are siblings of each other.
Multiple others hurt. 3 children and 6 adults rushed to the hospital with serious life-threatening injuries.
The scene was described by the first responders as extremely chaotic, with high level of emotions of those directly involved and those who witnessed this horrific incident.
The 66-year-old suspect, the sheriff says, cooperating at the scene, taken into custody for operating while intoxicated, causing death. Lindsay, authorities say the suspect may have been at a nearby tavern before the incident. Police say they've closed that establishment and were working on executing a search warrant. They add the suspect will likely face additional charges. Lindsay?
Our hearts are with that family. Ike, thank you. Tonight, police in Chicago are mourning the loss of one of their own. Authorities say an off-duty Chicago police officer, just 2 days shy of his 31st birthday, was gunned down as he headed home after his shift. Police are now searching for a suspect and a motive. Here's ABC's Irene Shaw.
Tonight, an urgent manhunt underway in Chicago after a police officer was gunned down on his way home from work.
Caller heard gunshots, looked outside and sees a male laying on the ground.
The city's mayor identifying the officer as 30-year-old Luis Huesca. Police say the 6-year veteran was shot multiple times just before 3 a.m. First responders rushing him to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead.
These are senseless crimes that are taking the lives of our community members.
Officers saluting Huesca as a procession took his body to the medical examiner's office. As of last Friday, there have been 645 shooting victims, including fatal and non-fatal incidents in the city so far this year, roughly the same number as during the same period last year. And Lindsay, with nobody arrested yet, the mayor says he is putting every available resource into this investigation. Lindsay?
Zorine, thank you. The most significant case in decades on homelessness goes before the 9 justices of the Supreme Court tomorrow. At issue whether cities and towns can fine or arrest people for sleeping outside when space in shelters is lacking. ABC's Jacqueline Lee joins us now from Los Angeles. Jacqueline, a lower court found the practice unconstitutional. What's on the line here for homeless people?
Lindsay, the Supreme Court will ultimately decide whether or not it is cruel and unusual punishment to penalize the homeless population for sleeping outside, even if they have nowhere else to go. This decision will be felt all across the country, but in particular right here in California, where officials are battling homeless encampments. 50% of the unsheltered population in the nation is right here in the state, and due to the lack of affordable housing and the unaffordable cost of living, Governor Gavin Newsom says that governments need flexibility when it comes to threats to public health and safety. Lindsay?
Jacqueline, thank you. And there's so much more ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday. An explosion and fire destroys a home in Maryland, and not a moment to lose. Good Samaritans team up to pull a driver out of a burning car. Next tonight, an investigation is underway into what caused a house explosion in Baltimore County, Maryland. The property was fully engulfed in flames by the time firefighters arrived Saturday night. Crews were on the scene for hours trying to put out hot spots. Fire officials say one man was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And what a finish today at the London Marathon. 4 women were battling at world record pace in the last mile of the race. The Olympic champion Perez Jeff Cheer of Kenya pulled away, finishing first in 2 hours, 16 minutes and 16 seconds. That's a new world record for a woman-only marathon. She was looking to defend her gold medal this summer in Paris. When we come back, country star Morgan Wallen breaks his silence after being charged with throwing a chair off the roof of a 6-story building. To the index now in a heart-stopping rescue outside of Minneapolis, where Good Samaritans risked their own lives to save a man trapped in his car. Take a look at this fire engulfing the vehicle, everyone desperately trying to open the door to get him out in time. They were eventually able to break a window and drag him to safety. The driver only suffered minor injuries. Country music star Morgan Wallen is breaking his silence on his arrest for allegedly throwing a chair from the roof of a 6-story bar in Nashville. In a post on X, Wallen wrote, "I'm not proud of my behavior and I accept responsibility." An arrest affidavit says the chair landed just 3 feet from officers. Wallen faces charges that include 3 felony counts of reckless endangerment. When we come back, as we celebrate Earth Day, an army of volunteers embarks on an urgent mission. Finally tonight, as we prepare to celebrate Earth Day, we meet some of the volunteers helping to clean up our planet. 10 million miles of American shoreline, a precious and endangered resource. Waterways in the U.S. are littered with billions of pieces of litter. Thanks to these Loyola University student volunteers, this Great Lakes shore is getting a pick-me-up this weekend.
A lot of cigarette butts. Beer bottles, some plastic, a lot of plastic.
Enter the Alliance for the Great Lakes, a 30-year-old organization that trains and organizes volunteers to help clean up that litter with their Adopt a Beach program. The Alliance hosts 9,000 volunteers who fan out to do 900 cleanups a year along the Great Lakes, banding together to pick up the litter and record the data.
This is the kind of data that no individual scientist could get, but because this is hundreds of thousands of volunteers, we have a lot of information to learn from.
One thing they've learned is the prevalence of plastics.
86% of the pieces of litter removed by volunteers are composed either partially or fully of plastics.
Unlike America's roadways, our shores are not regularly cleared of litter. They're also harder to access, so their cleanup relies on volunteers like these students. Last year, Great Lakes volunteers collected more than 500,000 pieces of litter, and the group expects to collect at least as much again this year.
I think being in these cleanups and around these volunteers definitely gives me a sense of hope. Being around that energy gives me hope that there is hope for solutions to this issue.
Some much needed solutions, and we are all grateful for the hope. And this week, we're kicking off a new series for Earth Week called The Power of Us, People, Climate, and Our Future. We'll have special reporting on all of our ABC News platforms on the climate challenges we face and empowering stories about possible solutions. We'll look at efforts to provide Native Americans with solar energy and how the cruise ship industry is working to restore the marine ecosystem. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Lindsay Davis. David Muir right back here tomorrow. From all of us here, have a great night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Your hours away from history. The prosecution says the case against 4 presidential details of who will testify in national trial. And we the prosecution's case. Joe Videos and Joe Biden's will birthday party. 2 children killed. With a dozen other people seriously hurt. Why? Come. Anyway, Jewish students after key protest at Columbia University. Because they're not safe and need to go home. Summer travel costs more Americans than ever testified. Because of airlines, maybe fewer planes. We need to price worse than they pay. A call on fire. Driver tracked. How a group of conspirators saved his life.
This is ABC News with Ellie Gibson.
Being named a milestone moment in trial will be full of that. Opening statements set against hours from now in that downtown Manhattan courtroom in his court case against former president. And tonight, we go close on the prosecution's roadmap here. How they intend to prove their case against Donald Trump and who they intend to call to the stand. With the jury now seated, the defense preparing a counter-impeach claim and the defendant himself turning courtroom into a campaign style. The other student starts off. That's hours from now, and it's stored moment for politics and the country's legal system. Opening statement, the criminal trial against Donald Trump in New York.
This is a preview of the facts to come.
David Packard, former publisher of the National Enquirer, and a trial ally, could be on the first witness calls. Other key witnesses include the Bell Phillips, Rory Daniels, Michael Cohen, Joshua Fitzer, Karen Newell, and Karen Duo, Sam White House communications director, and possibly Mr. Trump himself. The prosecution will make case to a jury of 7 men and 5 women, along with 6 ultimates. Unlike this matter of election interference. Mr. Trump is not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records related to $130,000 pay made. This Rory Daniels. Prosecutors say they keep quiet. How alleged sexual power, alleged access to leaked during the 2016 campaign. For president, has not allegation of the allegation of the and the payment. Mr. Trump is required to be at court every day except Wednesdays when court is on session, limiting his ability to campaign. His work on kept on Saturday to another. Meanwhile, President Biden from the NBC News poll, doubling Biden 2 points and down from 5 points. But the third party ends the next, Biden Trump by 2 points. The other exam court yesterday. This is just started the trial. The prosecutor was 6 weeks now. He is guilty. He's facing up to 4 years in prison. That's the same matter for bringing out the community in shock and reaching after driver crash in the children's birthday party. Tonight, Tiny in Michigan, and a trial caught on camera from Mobile Saturday. 30 book club. They raised money. And 66-year-old woman crashed inside, climbed 25 feet through a child's birthday party, killing 15 adults and kids, killing 2, a younger sister who were attending your friend's wedding. First responders sworn reports 1 book club south of Detroit.
The scene was described by the first responders as extremely chaotic.
The local sheriff cheering up.
2 of the victims were not seen at the scene. This includes an 8-year-old female and a 5-year-old male. Watching each other.
Family analyzing siblings as Lana and Zane, and your mother, Ryan, 12-year-old daughter Jane, were also at the party, entering critical condition. How are you feeling? Sad. Why? Sad. The driver who investigators say killed them hasn't been identified. Authorities say she's arrested robbery while intoxicated, death. The sheriff investigators believe she'd been at a tower earlier, and the abortion is on the claim. Anything else makes sense to you? Nothing. It's just a birthday party. You're just saying the imagery is not outside of book, but I can see that don't worry about it. We expect to update investigators tomorrow, right?
Yeah, that's why we're hoping for answers. No real questions, including the name of the driver. Meanwhile, today, Mitch Adams, Chairman, and Secretary of State, Holding Search and Verification. Thank you so much, Thank you. And learning more ignite your students in New York City University. Go home. That's what you work on campus. It's about rolling anti-sexism and growing protests against Israel's war Hamas. Attention. House demonstration. University in New York. Tonight, University of University. Stay away. We're being swept. Street and campus.
And really for the last plot this week, and have really turned to infamous violence and Jimmy.
New America has identity basis. She says she'll open the site when the Jewish saying all the targets. In the letter, team IDCUs. We'll be around. You can say stronger than your as possible. Remain on the right in our campus as a group. One say no chapter was location. One school. They also make left. It say reaction to the letter.
I feel but I feel is completely of the oral services that you can have watch days and the Jew and the campus.
Columbia University sources. LDCU's part. We're acting on certain different students. It's really hard to respond to their role here. And says that Columbia this week. Now Columbia University president should resign. Tonight, the White House saying part. All Americans have right to protest. Protest against the Party, Jewish and the Jewish community are blaming Senate, Constitutional, and Davis have absolutely no place any campus or any United States of America. Last week, all right campus. Let's hold arrest. That's really public. For more detention on campus. We're released MCUs.
They want to hotwire blue blast House Speaker facing down intensifying push by this came out leadership. All of it. Fall off for this board. This against help Ukraine. $60 billion.
Tonight, growing pressure on House Speaker Mike Johnson facing possible mutiny from fellow Republicans. Congressman Martin Taylor Greene is part of a trio of hardline conservatives promising to take Johnson out. The latest effort coming out of the House has a $95 billion foreign aid package to Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine. Democrats exploding applause on the House floor as the long-stalled funding finally flows. Johnson originally opposed White House push to send aid to Ukraine, but eventually allowed the vote to proceed. But there is bipartisan support to save Johnson's job. Johnson says he has to do his right. Meanwhile, in an interview with Chris Melber, Ukraine's president says the funding is critical.
This ain't cool. Stuff Ukraine. And sounds kind of policy.
Well, Martin Taylor Greene is going to plan to saying that will have it without recess. Nothing will come out this week. Ali, those are my first round. A transfer introduced popular parts under investigation tonight. Saturday. A European Justice. It was still moving a turn and collided with a and about 15 passengers were injured range from miles to miles. They were by NBC News, by NBC Universal. The airplane moved down into the highway. The driver trapped in a car up in flames. The next bravery of good Samaritans, every survived. The Corps 15 off 94 in Minnesota, a car crashing into a lamppost up in flames. The driver trapped. Then one after the other, good Samaritans pulling over, raising help. You can see the desperately trying to pull the car door open as jammed against the guardrail. The flames erupting, chasing bystanders away. Undeterred, they rushed back in. The highway were fire smashing the window open. The group pulling the driver to safety. Rises the driver in the front seat. Just in front lap, we'll be back. Record summer travel and not a plane. West Airlines first. Take video to go. During booking summer travel, you are not alone. A record number of Americans expected to fly somewhere this summer. Even more customers, airlines say have fewer planes than you'd like. Here's what's more. For travel, expected to source record heights, but potential shorter planes. Smooth on rising.
And that's the airline really racing to make sure that they handle that onrush of travel.
US Airlines this year expected to receive 40% fewer planes than they planned for last year. According to history, Airline Advisory, which means one thing for your travel budget.
From a consumer standpoint, with demand strong supply, we're relatively as ready for higher fares.
United Airlines and Southwest pause high rate. United offered their highest unpaid leave. Alaska Airlines along with Southwest unsure how many flights they fly. Calling their capacity forecast uncertain. All the airlines planes directly to Boeing 737 and production delays. The aviation giant facing quality control scrutiny and investigation by the FAA. The doors will in January. Boeing's airplanes will race to 83 last quarter compared to 157 one prior.
We've got this every return to 2018 goals again on construction. Airbus is getting air Boeing pretty badly.
Boeing's O'Brien West saying last month, we're literally going to slow get its flight. Everyone's made a decision to constrain rates on 7% program. All this on the brink of high travel demand. Major airlines racing for a huge travel season. On their website, gear for TSA travel numbers.
It means higher prices, but also planes that are going to be more full than they would otherwise be.
Airlines now have just lost 5 course rest before summer travel takes off. First NBC News.
So now remember, these Americans stayed hostage in Lebanon. Held more than 6 years from 1985 to 1991. It was a European state disaster. He was imprisoned by Islamic militant in his memoir. It is now New York Hudson Valley. He was 76 years old. That's NBC News for Sunday. I'm All this NBC. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
What to an idealistic American president, a wicked Wall Street investor, and liberation at the moment. Well, these roles have all been brilliantly played on screen on access. The Oscar award-winning actor, producer Michael Buttons, Hollywood Academy Award for Best Actor.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.